So yesterday, actually, during the break, I stopped the recording and I forgot to put it on again after the break. So pay attention to that one if I forget it again. All right. Okay. Let's go to the next quite easy indicator. It's the risk coverage ratio. What part of my portfolio at risk is covered? It's straightforward. You take the loan loss reserves. How many reserves do you have created? And you compare this to the outstanding balance on arrears on a number of days. You really are looking to what is outstanding balance on arrears plus including the renegotiated loans. So you're looking actually to what extent is my portfolio at risk 30 days covered by loan loss reserves. It's two balance figures. What are my loan loss reserves? I will show it in a figure that will make it more clear, but actually it's constituted, is created by your loan loss provisions. So it's a non-cash item, but I think I will not tell too much. I will show it on the screen and then it will be much more clearer. All right. So here, look to this, to our barrel, a healthy portfolio and a contaminated portfolio. It's always the same. And next to this, we have a small barrel. And this small barrel is also part of your balance sheet that you have created on as a reserves. That are your reserves. So when you compare both barrels, I have to extend again, my excuses for that. Otherwise, I will lose connection. Okay, I'll put it outside. So this is part of your balance sheet too. So these loan loss reserves. So when you say, look, I want to have my reserves available for at least everything that is highly contaminated. So this black part is all the outstanding loans from clients who haven't shown up for more than 1 year in my office. So this is highly contaminated. It's not lost yet. It's still in my books. It's still on my balance sheet, but I'm preparing myself for potential losses, and I've created at least loan loss reserves that do cover this part. Actually, they also cover potential losses for all clients that haven't shown up in my office for more than 3 months, and even a little bit more. So I have here, this barrel is quite well filled. And how do I fill this one? Now pay attention, because this is my only animation in this slide. By your loan loss provisions from your P&L, from your profit and loss statement. Here, that's it. When this is moving, you are paying, but it's a non-cash item. Yes, this is to fill your barrel. Your profit will go down by filling this barrel. We will come back to that one. I will skip this. This is everything you have to know about your. No, I will not skip it. Otherwise, it might become a little. I will make it more clear with this one. Look, if you have in your extra information, this kind of information is not in your balance sheet available. And many organizations, the microfinance institution, the balance sheet, they just show their gross loan portfolio, outstanding gross loan portfolio. But here you have a breakdown that is available in the fact sheet. Every organization does have this kind of information available. You have the healthy part, the green one. It's most important normally. You might have a rescheduled part, and then you have the breakdown according to the aging, with this very highly contaminated part on the bottom of your of your barrel. Now you can decide, or regulator decides, to what extent you are allowed to make provisions for potential losses. As we said, at least 100% for more than 1 year, even 100% for everything more than 6 months. But many organizations and regulators do say, look, for clients that haven't shown up between 1 and 30 days, the risk is not that high, so it's only for 10% that you can make provisions, that you can create reserves for that. If you look to the result, in this organization, you could say if you are covered according to this standard, and this is depending on the regulation in the country, this is depending on the organization itself, to what extent the internal policy on provisioning. You create a barrel of 4.7 million, making it possible for you to at least cover a big part of the contaminated portfolio. Okay, so if you still have your colors available and you can open your video, thank you. So the first question, red, green, or orange. It measures the ability of the MFI to cover its potential loan losses. Is this true or false? If you put the color next next to it, I like very much what you have found for colors in your. I see green, green. I think it's all green. Yeah, of course. It's for potential losses. The second question, it's not necessarily equal to 100%. It's not required to have a 100% coverage of your portfolio, of your risk portfolio. True or false? Now I see some different colors, but mainly green. And green is the right one. It's the word not necessarily. Actually, in most cases, it's lower. In general, the microfinance industry, let's say, is around 80–90%. Some have lower, and this might be a question. Because how can you, and you can type it or you can raise your hand if you know the answer, if you want to answer, but how can you protect yourself also against potential losses? Because this is with your own internal loan loss reserves. You put aside in your reserves a part that might be used when you have to get rid of these bad loans. So when you have to write off, that's the reason why you create this small barrel with the loan loss reserves. But actually, what other ways do you have to protect yourself against potential losses?
Collateral?
Yes, actually, indeed. So this is possible. Some if some of your loans are covered by collateral, this can be collateral in kind by that you have registered, but it can be also by many organizations do use compulsory savings. Yes, it's a practice with a lot of discussion. If this is from a social point of view, a good practice, but let's say most of cooperatives, for example, in Western Africa, in general, they all have 25% collateral by savings. So if you have that kind of collateral available, it's not really logical to have a 100% coverage on top of that by your provisioning and to create your loan losses. So this is certainly a reason why it might be lower than 100%. And then another question.
Sorry,
It
sir.
must, yes,
Yeah, I wanted to ask something.
yes.
What if you insure the company? Can you also count it as a risk protection?
And what do you say about insuring? Insuring against what?
Insuring the bed against potential fall or potential lack of liquidity. Because I know that many companies also get insured. So is it possible for MFI to get insured so that when they face a liquidity problem, uh, to get reimbursed or something like that?
Actually, I'm a bit surprised to hear about this specific insurance. I don't know if to what extent is this an insurance with a premium that you pay, and when you fall short of liquidity, you get it's an insurance company paying that?
No, actually, I'm asking. It's just a
Ah.
conception that I'm having in mind.
Okay. Imagine, no, actually, this is, it's not an insurance that I ever heard about. It's possible that you can have access to specific credit lines for when when there is when you fall, when you have a shortage of liquidity. So you can have arrangement with banks to help on that one. But actually, no, it has to be related with your loan portfolio. So I don't know even this doesn't exist. I think I've never heard about. Might be possible, but it's more something that you have that it has to be related with your loan loss, with your portfolio and your clients. So collateral is certainly related with this one. Hmm? But for example, if you are, but you can also that you have if you have problems, for example, for the payment of your staff, and you need liquidity for the payment of your staff, so it's not related to your gross loan portfolio. So try to keep it. No, they have to keep it close to the portfolio.
Okay.
And it has to be analyzed in conjunction with the portfolio at risk and the write-off, since all the three are interdependent. I see indeed all green showing up. Not everybody showing it yet, but the ones that I can see, it's correct. It's a mantra. I'm saying that so many times. Don't stick to one indicator, because that's not. You have also, it has to be linked, interlinked. So here you see a lower can be justified by having collateral. It can be also that your organization is not having, let's say, loan loss reserves for 100% because the regulation doesn't allow you to do that, to do this. For example, in Western Africa, normally they only start provisioning starting from portfolio at risk 90 days. That's what the regulator is saying. So organizations are perhaps not allowed to do this according to regulation, but sometimes you have to be more severe than the regulator. If you feel that it's required for organization, you can make more provisions, but in that case, these provisions are perhaps not tax friendly. You have to pay taxes in advance. So that's sometimes a balance you have to find. Sometimes we do see organizations having even a higher coverage risk, more than 100%. It might be that your organization is anticipating for an upcoming economic crisis. If you know this is going on, my farmers, I have all the money with my farmers. Nobody of these farmers is already in a position that they have to pay back, but I know there is a climate crisis. I can already start making specific uh, um, provisions and creating loan loss reserves for a possible upcoming crisis. And what might be a rapid variation be indicating a deterioration or improvement of the loan portfolio quality. Imagine that you have created your barrel, your small barrel, but suddenly everybody is paying back by one or other reason. So on the left side, it's the contamination is much lower. In that case, you can have a higher risk coverage. Some regulators do force you in that case to take some provisions back and to consider this as an income again, and then you have to pay on the profit some taxes. But this is the balance. It's more the game related to for fiscality. So this is not that important, I think, for the understanding of the loan loss reserves. This is more at the level of the bookkeeping to make it to optimizing for fiscal reasons. But this is not what we are teaching here because it's dependent on many specific situations. Okay, if we go to our two microfinance institutions of yesterday. And you remember this is the small car. What do you think about the risk coverage? So you remember it went up, the portfolio at risk, the red part went up halfway the year in 2016, and this is what you see. What do you think? Is it good? What do you think about risk coverage of this one? You see there is a negative trend. It's going down, the risk coverage, but so here you can say, oh, trend is not that positive. It's a lower risk coverage, but it's still close to 100%. So it's certainly not bad. Right? So the trend might be negative, but it's certainly still a good risk coverage. Although the portfolio at risk went up very suddenly, but we said yesterday it might be also because of the cycle in the year. If you look to the other organization, yeah, that's the larger one. We will see it's also an older one, a much more stable organization. PAR 30 is under control for the last 3 years, and you can see they also created these loan loss reserves, and it's more than 100%. So no problem for these two organizations. I think it's obvious for all of you, isn't it? No. I'm looking to all of you, but I don't see people saying yes or no. Let's make it like this. If you understand and that question, if you just put up your thumb, then I know it's understood. Okay. But Sylvia, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I was late. I couldn't enter into the meeting. Could you very shortly repeat whether the risk coverage covers only those contaminated part of the portfolio?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I will show the figure, and actually it's the most easy indicator. The way we showed it was like this. Is actually you have here the contaminated part, and next to that you create in your reserves the loan loss reserves by filling this small barrel with your provisions, but we will come back to the provisions later on, and you compare the level of your loan loss reserves compared to the level of your contaminated part of the portfolio, and the more the better.
Okay, so the provision, so this is the accounting risk coverage and not the collaterals that
that's not the
have.
collateral. That's the reason why it might be lower, because on next to your loan loss reserve, you have another way of protecting or being prepared for potential losses by collateral or by compulsory savings. These are two other ways of, but compulsory savings, they are linked to one specific client. Yes. This loan loss reserve is not linked to individuals, it's linked to your total contaminated portfolio.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome. All right, let's go to the next part. It's already it's the last one. This is just a bookkeeping exercise. The write-off ratio. Finally, there might be a moment that, that you decide this part cannot be recovered anymore. This client will never show up. You can keep this forever on your account, in your balance. Imagine that this part is very highly contaminated. You can keep it on your balance sheet. Some more informally organized MFIs, they never write off. They just keep it sometimes for years, but it's not reflecting the real situation. It looks like it will come back, and it's better that after a certain time that you write off in order to have a clear balance sheet that you know exactly where you are. It doesn't mean that you have to forget about it. Sometimes we talk about transparency to your clients. Now, this is not always the case. When you never tell a client, I've written off your loan. This is something you do in the back office, because clients might misunderstand this one. Because writing off it's something you really do in the back office. It's a bookkeeping exercise. It's quite easy to do if you have enough loan loss reserves, but don't tell your clients you did it. Keep also track of it. And some organizations, even after writing off, you don't forget about it and you try to recover. Even some organizations do a lot of efforts even after the writing off to recover. And it's still possible that on a later stage that client still will pay back. In that case, it's an extraordinary income for your organization because it was already off the books, and then it comes back as a kind of extraordinary income. Now, what's writing off? You can explain it in many ways. I have to say this is the best way for me to understand, and I hope for you the same. Actually, writing off is this exercise. You define, you have filled your barrel by provisions. That's the cost. When that is moving, that's the cost. That's an expense. But once this is done, you decide writing off, and you do as follows. You say, look, I'm connecting the two barrels with a tap. And you decide what part do I want to write off. In this case, don't look to the rescheduled part. I'm writing off the 1 year, the black part. And you open the tap. And that's it. The writing off is done. So it's that easy. You want to see it again? So contaminated part, small barrel. When you look if it's filled, yes, then you do the exercise, and this is just an accounting exercise by deciding what part do I want to write off. And now I have another look of my portfolio. So writing off is actually making your gross loan portfolio, look better. It's much more healthy. If you now look to the contaminated part, there is a big part is gone, and it looks much better. Okay, you have also your loan loss reserves, and the balance between both is also more different. But this is an exercise. This is the real situation to continue your activities. So writing off is very easy. I will show later on with some real figures to make it even more clear how you can do this by using the fact sheet. François and Maria, you have a question. François.
Yes, so that's not a cash expense, I think. Okay, so my question is, when you decide
it's even not an expense. The write-off is not an expense. Right?
Okay, so
and actually, it's even not changing your. Finally, at the end, it doesn't change even your balance because the net loan portfolio, and this is the net loan portfolio, is between the gross loan portfolio minus your loan loss reserves. So it's that part here. If you see this net gross loan portfolio doesn't change. So that's exactly the same. This provision is a non-cash item. And so it's an expense, but it's a non-cash item. But we will discuss the provision later on to see the difference.
So my question will be, when do the MFI pay also? Because I didn't understand when they will. They lost the loan in a way. So maybe the client will never reimburse. So
that's
how
it, yeah.
how do they do in a cash way to get their money back? What do they do?
Yeah, and you can, so they have made provisions, so it's off the balance sheet, but it's still, so it's not on the balance sheet anymore, but they keep record of it in another document. They will not forget about it. They still keep record of it, and they will go, they have a policy, or they go by themselves to the client, and they have people to continue to discuss with the client and to try to get it back. Some even take clients to court. It might be possible that there is at court a way of doing so. And when that client pays back, okay, the cash money finally comes in, but it was not expected anymore, so it's considered as an extraordinary income. Or you can, that's just more, it's more accounting principles. The most important is the money, it can come back later. It's not because you have written off that it's not allowed to pay back anymore.
Okay.
Okay, I see the hands. That no other question about this one. All right, then. So the way of calculating your write-off ratio, you look to the amounts written off by the total outstanding gross loan portfolio. This is the definition that we use. Other organizations do use the average outstanding gross loan portfolio, but this is a real discussion between specialists. We take the most common one, so we don't take the average, but there might be, I just want to show you, even if there is an agreement in the sector that every single indicator has its own definition, for some indicators there might be a difference, but for most indicators that we show here is a common sense in the sector. But you will see for the write-off is one of these indicators that might be different depending on the rating agency or the organization using it. Don't pay too much attention to it. This is the best definition. Keep this in mind. So it's just an accounting procedure. It will not affect the net outstanding loan portfolio, as I have shown to you. So it will not affect the total assets when you have done this exercise. It's a back office exercise, and that's it. So if you use your colors again, this is saying it should not affect the effort to recover the loan or the obligation of the borrower to reimburse his credit. Yes, you are really paying all very well attention. An aggressive write-off policy reduces the net results of the MFI. Actually, this is not a good question. So every answer is correct, what you're saying now. Because actually, when you say it's only, it reduces the net results of the MFI, when is it using, when actually when you have an aggressive policy, because it's a misleading question, I have to keep it out. Last year I thought about it and I forgot. Actually, when you have an aggressive policy and you are always writing off. Let's say, imagine that you write off every single loan in arrear. You have to put in a lot of provisions, otherwise you cannot write off. And when you add provisions, that reduces the net results of your MFI, because it's an expense. It's a non-cash expense, but it's still an expense. So your net result will go down. This is only true when you have enough provisions in your loan loss, in your small barrel, in your loan loss reserves. So this is not a very good question. If we go and have a look to our two organizations, in the fact sheet, it's interesting to put the portfolio at risk plus the write-off ratio together. Because when we were saying for MFI X, you remember when I show you the first time MFI X, let's have the look where it is. Sorry, I'm just looking.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah.
When you speak about the net result, you speak about is it the net profit?
Yeah, the net result of the net profit of your organization in the P&L, indeed. Okay. Yeah. So you remember when I showed this figure, we said, okay, it was for years quite stable, this organization. It's only at the end that it went up. You remember? But when we see now the same, when we add the information on the write-off, actually, we saw that it was not that smooth line for years. Actually, in 2012, before writing off, the portfolio at risk 30 days was not 3.1, but 8.2. So imagine that there was no write-off. The line would have been something like this, a U shape. And then your analysis is completely different by adding the information on the write-off to this organization. You see, it was a very aggressive write-off. You can say a write-off normally is around 1%. It's a quite normal one. It's not too aggressive. But a write-off of 5% is very high. So there was already another problem in this organization, and now that problem seems to show up. They haven't written off yet. But this might be also the internal policy. For writing off, it's not something you do automatically. There must be a policy in place within your organization for doing this. And many organizations do write off only at the end of the year. So you can see in many fact sheets when they are sending this to you, that during the year you don't see write-offs, but it's something they do at the end of the year in December. This is the policy clearly of MFI X, while MFI Y, they do have already a small write-down. They did already a small write-off halfway the year. But you can see the shape, the portfolio quality of organization Y, it's much higher, much better. A much lower portfolio at risk, very low write-off, and a good risk coverage. So here you can see this organization was less stable. Okay. Here I have some figures on write-off. As you can see, it's in general it's around between 1% and 2%. It's not. If your portfolio quality is good, of course you don't have to write off very much. Be careful, but it's a practice you have to apply in your organization. So this is all about portfolio quality.
Professor?
Yes?
Yes, I have a question. In the percentage of write-off ratio in Africa, for MFI in Africa, I see that it's 2%.
It was a bit higher.
Bit more, yeah, higher than 2%. So illustrate this. Many portfolios are subject to loss in Africa.
Yeah, that's here you have to. That's what I say. Be careful with benchmarks. Here I see it's between 1% and 2%. You see, it's also close to Latin America. It's just Asia did have very low risk portfolios. At that time, yeah, you can look for explanations, perhaps because of the more group lending systems, or just because of the sample of your for creating the benchmark. As I told you, these benchmarks were created or calculated by the sample of the mix market. And when you look to the sample, there were less MFIs of Africa in that one. So it might be possible that the sample was just a number of MFIs with a higher write-off ratio for that specific year. So it's just to give you an indication. Don't, let's say between 1% and 2% is quite normal. Right? Just keep this in mind. Don't this year, if you'd have if new data would have been available for 2020, you will see that the write-offs will be extremely high for this year because of the corona. Huh? All right. So last exercise for these four.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to have like your personal view about the policy of writing off. Do you, after how much time can MFI can write off?
Yeah, I would say the normal is after 1 year, but certainly not longer than 2 years. Contaminated portfolio for more than 2 years, there's no reason for keeping this in your balance sheet. But the normal procedure is after 1 year.
Okay, because in one of the figure you showed us there is one place where there were 6 months, but they're starting already to write off.
No, this is not. It's not when doing. This is not how long, but it's more when do you do the writing off within your organization. Eh? So they were doing this halfway the year in the month of June already. Eh?
Okay.
If you have a good MIS system, you can do writing off every month. You add a little bit. That's possible, but at least you do it once a year. Eh? And for the more informal organizations, I think, and when you don't have a performant MIS system, yeah, do it at the end of the year. So you are talking about the frequency. Huh?
Yeah, the frequency, exactly.
The frequency, yes. Yeah, at least once a year, of course. But if your system is proficient, you can do that every month.
Okay,
it's more depending on the workload, I would say. Okay. So here, green is the right part and red is the left part. So if you have only this information, it's just a summarizing, it's straightforward exercise. If you have only this information, which one has the best portfolio quality? If you only look to this, I think it's very obvious, no?
Just a question, Professor.
Yeah.
This is the part 31.
Yeah, this is the part 31 or part 30. It's, yeah, you can choose the number of days. Some talk about it's taken from Planet Rating and they used part 31. And doesn't that one day doesn't make actually the real difference. But if you only look to this figure, you have no other information available. Organization red, it has a portfolio at risk of 6% and the other B has 3%. Which one is the best in class based on only this one? Red or green? Yeah, I see green, 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 and here in front of me I see red as the best performing. Sorry, what's your name here? On the front row?
Yes, I am Mulalam. I was thinking that the right one is red. Sorry.
The red one is red. That's also yes. So you think that A is the better performing?
No, that's the right one. The right one.
Ah, okay, the right one. No,
Yeah.
okay, that is okay. So A red, then you were right. Okay, thank you. So that's for clear, that's for sure. If I add this information, the par 90 or 91, for both the same, which one is best in class? The best performing? Now I see a lot of different colors. Just see, I can hear you can see what your colleagues are thinking. Yeah, I see a lot of colors. Yeah, I'm looking to your name with the jersey, the red jersey here on the second row at the right side. You say, what's your name? What's your name? Sorry?
Yannick.
You're Yannick. Sorry, Yannick. I've met you already. Sorry that I'm not Louis. Yannick, you think that red is in a better shape. Tell me why.
I'm considering the fact it's at equal it's equalized after 91 days, so it performed better after some time. Because yeah, at the beginning you see the second one didn't move at all.
Yeah. So that's, I think, is a good explanation. So it means when it's equal, it means that actually all clients that haven't shown up for more than 1 month are actually all clients that haven't shown up for more than 3 months. In case of A, all clients that haven't shown up for more than 1 month is 6%, but more than 3 months, it's already half of them are actually only between the bracket between 30 and 90 days. It's only half of them are more than 90 days. So here you can still doubt, because it's still an important part that is in arrear. But if we add even more information, on top of that, the write-off ratio, imagine that you have to put on this on top of the par 30 to make it comparable. Then you can see they have written off a much lower amount compared to the par 90 to reach this, compared to organization B. In order to have this figure, they have written off a very large part. And if you add even the next information, to what extent, the scale is now different. Who is still thinking that B is the better one? Nobody dares, I think. Or is somebody very courageous and saying, I still believe in B? Don't think so. So just by, and if we can even go a little bit further, what is the cost for this risk coverage? It doesn't mean that you can have a very high risk coverage at a low cost. This is when you have enough, when your portfolio at risk is not too high, and when your barrel, when you start to fill, is not too empty yet. So we will come back to the provision expense ratio as the next indicator. So if you combine the portfolio at risk, the write-off, the risk coverage, and provision expense ratio, you have a very good idea about the situation of the portfolio quality. Okay? Yes. So here it's some summarized, but I will skip this because you can read it when I'm sending the slides to you. I'm going to. Have I skipped the provision expense ratio? I'm just looking. My excuses for that. I'm just double checking. Yes, yes. We went to write-off without talking about this provision expense ratio. My excuses for that one. So I skipped an important indicator. So the provision expense ratio. Here, really pay attention to a very simple but useful principle. I talked yesterday about comparing a movie and a picture. Now your loan loss provisions, that's this moving part from your profit and loss statement. So this is an expense from your profit and loss account. So this is the movie. This is an expense. When you want to compare this to your gross loan portfolio, you have to make at least a small picture of it by using a small movie by taking the average of two pictures. Otherwise, you will have you will make a big mistake. So when comparing a P&L with a balance sheet, always take the average. Take this as a rule of thumb because it's a very interesting one. And again, don't confuse this loan loss provision expense from the income statement with the loan loss reserves. Sometimes people mixing both concepts with each other. One is reserves and one is provision expense. Why making this this average? When you are combining, there is another principle that you have to keep in mind. When you combine both figures, a profit and a loss figure with a balance sheet, you always have to keep in mind annualization. Is this something you already discussed in other classes, annualization? Can you show yes or no? Is this completely new annualization? It's not discussed, or it is?
It's not discussed.
It's not.
It's not. Okay. Yeah, I will during the break, in that case, create a small exercise to show it to you. Then that will explain. What I can tell you already, and then it will, when you take the picture halfway the year, like for example, the expenses of all your operating expenses until June, and you divide this by the average balance sheet halfway the year, in that case, you have to multiply by 2. You have to make as if your numerator is the cost for a whole year. So if you have only expenses for a half year, you make as if it is for a full year. This is actually annualization. But I will show it with a graph, with an exercise after the break to make it more clear. But annualization is saying make as if your expenses, multiply them as if it is for a full year. If you are looking to 3-month figures, multiply by 4. Yes, that's annualization. Otherwise, you cannot make conclusions. That's the reason why you have to do as if it's a cost for 1 year. It's a guess. Huh? It might be changing in reality, but by multiplying, at least you are close to the potential, to the real situation of a annualized figure. So we were talking about these provisions. Can you show your colors? It's filling your barrel. Huh? This ratio gives an indication of the expense incurred by the institution to anticipate future loan losses. I see few people already showing the colors. I see here the colors are popping up. There's one red, and it's Yannick. Why do you think it's red? That is not an indication of the expense, according to you? I don't hear the microphone is off.
Sorry, the microphone was off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a ratio for expense. That the definition you give sound more to me like reserves, for reserves.
Yeah, but this is actually the indicator to create your reserves. So it's the answer is true. So this is an expense you make to create your loan loss reserves. So your provision expense ratio is indeed an expense that you have to anticipate for future loan losses and to create your loan loss reserves. So therefore, it's certainly linked to this expense is certainly linked to future loan losses. Okay. It increases automatically with the overall portfolio growth, the indicator. Will it increase automatically? I see different colors now, red and green. Even more red. So actually it's indeed, it's false. And the reason why? Of course, the expense might increase because you have a larger loan and you have perhaps more expenses. But remember, the expense ratio is the expenses divided by the average gross loan portfolio. So if your portfolio quality is good, it remains the same. It's not like it grows automatically. If the quality of your portfolio goes wrong, in that case, indeed, your indicator will grow, will be higher, but it's not automatically because you are growing. Actually, sometimes we see the opposite. When you have a fast growing portfolio, the arrears are not possible. So your portfolio at risk is most of the times lower because all these new loans, when you have a fast growing portfolio, they cannot be in arrears yet. So you don't have to make provisions, not to make loan loss reserves yet. So it's sometimes the opposite. Sometimes it goes down because of the high portfolio growth. So, and then for the other last question. For a regulated MFI, the level of this indicator will depend on the local banking regulations, which prescribe minimum rates of provisioning. Yeah. Indeed, I see all green. That's quite straightforward. I remember we once had, there was somebody with yellow. I think was doubting a little bit. Right? But the doubt is gone, I hope. I cannot see what you are. I remember we were working together with a very informal organization in the Philippines at a certain stage, and they did have a provisioning policy that was not regulated by any official organization. So actually, they could make provisions as much as they wanted. I mean, there was no regulation applying for them, and their system was 1% every year of the gross loan portfolio we put in our loan loss reserves by this provisioning. And the loan loss reserve ratio for that organization was more than 3,000%. So they had a huge reserves created. that was actually a stupid exercise. By doing it, actually, they were hiding all the profits. It was an organization who wanted to show that they were not making profit, and they were hiding it by making huge provision expenses. They were allowed to do so because there was no regulator. And so they were filling that small barrel to a level that it was nearly it was 30 times the size of the contaminated part. So that was certainly exaggerated. But I see Yannick having a question.
So I have a question related to that example you just gave us.
Mm-hmm.
How does the government then what is the strategy for the government to tax those kind of microfinance?
No, they were not. That was an informal organization, so there was no control on that one. They didn't have to pay taxes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So when you look to the fact sheet here, this is the breakdown of portfolio yield. We will discuss all these indicators later on, but at least I want to show you that the provision expense, there are actually, the blue part are 3 groups of costs, or 3 groups of expenses. The operating expenses, on top of that, the funding expenses, we will discuss this later on, and the third one is the provision expenses. So here you can see the provisioning for X and Y. You remember that was the year of a very high write-off, so it was 3.5 provisioning at that time. You see that they have, for the last years, it was already quite high, 3% and even 5.3%. The provisioning expense of 2% is considered as quite normal. So this organization is having quite important provision expenses to create, and you remember it was just at 100% that they arrived in halfway the year with the loan loss reserves. If we see to the other one, you remember that they were anticipating, they had a huge write-off in 2014, if you still remember, and they probably created in the year before these loan loss reserves, so they were anticipating it was a very high provision expenses, but here you can see 2.4, 2.2, it's quite normal in the sector of microfinance. If we see here some benchmarks between 1, as you can see, between 1 and 3%, just to give you an idea what is high and what is low, 2% is quite normal. This year, we have partners in Uganda with provisioning expenses going up to 20% and 30%. So this year is a very exceptional year. So now I have finally discussed the 4 groups of indicators related to portfolio quality. I'm just going to the next session. Yeah, this kind of information you have all received in your mailbox already. I have given a summary of these indicators. So definitions, including the benchmarks, are, let's say, benchmarks in general to give you an idea, are all included in the slides. I'm just looking to all of you regarding portfolio quality. Do you feel comfortable? Okay. I promise to give you an example of such a provisioning of a non-cash item, because also previous years I see that the difference between a real cash and a non-cash might be sometimes confusing, but I also want to make some promotion for our fact sheet, you know. We are quite convinced that this is one of the best tools in the world. So I hope that at the end of this training that I can convince you about that one. So let's take such I take an example from an organization in Africa. So let's have a look. Teams, yeah. So if you see this organization, when you go to the fact sheet, it's better that you start looking at, and these are real figures. So sometimes you might see awkward things happening. And I will come back to that later, but here you can see number of clients dropping like this. I will not discuss it now, but this is for later on. We started with the portfolio quality. You remember less than 5. Is it clear? Can everybody read this one, or must I increase the size?
Increase a little bit.
A little bit. So that's the best I can do. Now it's full screen for myself. Is that also for you? Yes. So you can see this organization is did have problems in the past. If you can see here, the portfolio at risk 10, 8, 11, 14. Now it's better, close to the 5. But if we look to the 14%, that is already very high. It's 3 times higher than an acceptable level. Actually, in 2015, it was after the writing off of 16%. So the portfolio at risk before writing off was nearly 30%. What do you think if you see something like this? You can raise your hand if you have an explanation. What might be a reason for that? That suddenly this organization, after years of quite stable, did have something like this. And it's good that we added the write-off on top of that. Otherwise, you would have thought that this is, yes, just a little bit more than the previous years, but it was extremely more than the previous year. Any idea? You can, François, you have an idea.
Maybe is that these MFIs has an homogeneous clients, meaning that they are all in the same sector, and maybe something happened and all the client at the same time wasn't able to pay it anymore, so they have big trouble.
Yeah, it's one of the hypotheses, but it's, yeah, this is really a sudden change of clients' behavior, right? But I see also, Yannick, you have also an hypothesis.
A kind of social political crisis in that country that made people not able to repay on time.
Is indeed one of the possibilities. Could have been one of the items. Yes, Yvette. I don't hear you. Yeah, Yvette. Hello. Can you raise your hand and I know who is Yvette? No. Then I go to Maria.
Maybe also a change in the politics of management. Sorry.
It's more from the political part, you think? Yeah.
I mean, in the policy of management of the institution, they decide to change the rules in the own institution.
Yeah.
How to I mean, and also maybe there is a kind of accumulation of another year's credits, bad credits or something similar.
Yeah, actually, I will reveal what the real story of this organization was. I think if it's a change of policy in the organization, then it was a real bad change. It's certainly not good, but this is this was a clear case of a fraud. So what happened actually in one of the branches, they were giving, let's say, fake loans to clients that didn't exist. So this was the whole branch actually was the internal control system was not very good in this organization. And so loan officers were actually giving out loans to clients that didn't exist, and they were putting it in their own pockets. So they had to close down that one. They brought everybody to court. So a number of the loan officers, including the director, the branch manager, they were all put in prison finally. So this was something that organization didn't know for many years, that this was going on. And then, yeah, they had to write off these loans in 1 year because they were all fake loans and they couldn't recover it because these people didn't have the money anymore, were in prison. So also these things are also happening in the sector, right? But you can see it's you can see it immediately. And now, of course, this year writing off, they did have, it's still a little bit better, 5.9 compared to the previous years. After writing off, it was indeed in better shape, but you can see it's only 40%. It's only 40% of risk coverage. Now I just want to make the exercise just to give you an idea how the fact sheet is working. First of all, some promotion for the fact sheet. As you can see, if you don't know what is already all included in the fact sheet, I give you some features. Gross loan portfolio, you double click on the reference and you have a built-in handbook with all the information on the topics. So that's quite practical. It's also interesting for the exchange of information with other stakeholders. It's used to discuss figures with talk about your figures with your management, with your board of directors, but also when organizations are using it also to exchange with investors. So we have created this fact sheet in a number of languages. In meantime, this is the 4.1 version. We have already a new version, but you can see English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Vietnamese, Khmer. This is here from Cambodia, and Arab. So we have all these languages included, and by just clicking on the language, everything changes. All your graphs are put in, will change to Spanish, and I hope it is working well here. I have to look to it because I just tested it before, and don't tell me that it's not working now. It just switched to English. Go back to Portuguese, make sure that it's working. This is when you want to make promotion. Voila, it's working. So now it's in Portuguese. All your indicators, all your graphs are in Portuguese, and this makes it easy to exchange information. So the tool is a very practical, straightforward one. I go back to English now to show you that you can use this fact sheet also to make some hypothesis and to see what's the effect when I do some more provisions. You remember we are going to fill the barrel. And where do you find the barrel, the small barrel in the fact sheet? I will show it right now. I will make it a little bit larger. If we go in the balance sheet, of course, your gross loan portfolio is part of the assets. You can see it here on line 20. So this is your portfolio, the healthy part, including the contaminated part. It's 3 billion Rwandese francs for this organization. The loan loss reserves, the small barrel, is also part of your balance sheet. And normally loan loss reserves are actually part of the equity. Yeah? But because of this loan loss reserves, they are so closely related to your gross loan portfolio, it's always shown, and not only in this fact sheet, but in all the balance, in all the financial statements, as a negative asset. So instead of putting this small barrel below somewhere between the other reserves, we just put it as a negative asset next to your large barrel. Right? And the difference between both, you remember, that's the net portfolio of this organization. All right? Can everybody see? If you put your thumb, then I know you have understood. Okay, thank you. Now, we want to know about this gross loan portfolio, the breakdown. How is this, how does it look? What is healthy? What is contaminated? So we go to the extras, the tab here below, you can see. And on the extra, here you have the defaulting portfolio, including you have on schedule, that's the larger part, the green part, 2.8 billion, a little bit rescheduled, and a number of defaults between 1 and 30 days, 30 to 60. There is nothing more than 1 year. So that's the contaminated part in real figures. So if I take now the contaminated part only for more than 30 days, that's this one. So I don't include from 1 to 30, but I'm only take more than 30 days. That's the part 30. This one, as you can see below, the total amount is 188 million. And that's the sum of these 4 figures. It's 188 million. Imagine that I say I want to have loan loss reserves available for a 100% coverage of this amount. Yes, do I have 188 million in my small barrel? I go back to my balance sheet and I see, no, I only have 78 million in my small barrel. So it's not covered for 100%, and I can see this in my graph. Indeed, it's only covered for 40%. That's the figure. So I will make some provision expenses. I will add to the small barrel. And I will make it simple. I will add 100 million. So it's a little bit to have an easy figure. I do a little bit more. I go to my P&L and now have a look. In your P&L, as you can see, the net profit of the net income for the organization is 88 million, so they have a positive income. Now we go to this non-cash item. You see here you have cash items like income from your fees. You have cash items like staff expenses that you have to make. You have to pay salaries, so this is cash items. But here we have this non-cash item, and this is the loan loss provision expenses. And I know they did a bit strange, that organization. They took back in the month of September, they have an accumulated negative provision expenses. So this means that they haven't added, they have taken out. It's a very weird way of working around, but we know it's not enough in our barrel. So I add that 100 million expenses to my as a provision expenses. You can see this is now my provision expense, and you will see my net profit is now negative on my P&L. So it's a non-cash item, but it does affect my net income because it's an expense. But what have I done with this expense? So I go to my balance sheet to make the link. You can see this is not automatically because it's here. I still see that my previous profit of the year is still shown. So I have to make sure that, and then I go to the 9th month, that the provision expense that I took, so that's 100 million, is now also shown in my fact sheet. And so in my P&L, it's minus 11 million. In my balance sheet, it has to be the same. It's also minus 11 million. But okay, it's a non-cash expense. So what have I have created this small barrel. And so I have add 100 million in the small barrel. And this is my small barrel. So as you can see, my total assets are not equal anymore to my equity and liabilities. There is a difference now of 100 million because I used here my expenses, so my profit went down. So I have to balance my figure. So here I add my 100, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So now you can see my small barrel has increased with 100 million. My balance total assets compared to equity and liabilities is exactly the same. If I go now to my financial graphs, I see that my risk coverage is now much higher. I see that in the previous one, you couldn't see there was a negative. They took back quite a lot of provisions, but now I have a provision cost. And what you also see that this is later on, it has effect on my operational self-sufficiency. If I just go a little bit back to the previous one, if you see it here before all these changes in my financial graphs, my operational self-sufficiency was 113%, but by adding this, I cannot do it automatically. So, but by adding these provision expenses and to increase my loan loss, my reserves, my loan loss reserves and my risk coverage, there was a non-cash expense, and it does have an effect on my net profit, and it decreases my operational self-sufficiency. But this indicator, operational self-sufficiency, we will see later in this training. But here you can see how this is actually in reality working when you are doing this in your accounting system. And the fact sheet, it's making it easy when you want to see what will be the effect, what if. It's something, if you are a little bit familiar with, by using this Excel, you can make that kind of hypothesis and to see the effects of by changing one figure. Okay. So this is, you can play around. I will send a fact sheet also in Excel format, and if you don't know what to do in the evening, just play around with the figures of the fact sheet. Huh? It can become a new hobby. All right. I will close it here, and we will go to the next group of indicators. We have now discussed the most difficult part, actually, of all the indicators. All the rest will be much easier. We'll go also a little bit faster because we have still 3 groups to go. I take... So the next one that we will discuss is on efficiency and productivity. but I think it's time for a break. It's now 1 hour and a half. So we will start. Is it okay that we don't take the break too long and that we see each other certainly within 15 minutes? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sorry, you are muted.
Sorry, I'm just talking all the time. No, thank you. I just want to make sure, can you just put on your video, then I know that we are back in class all together. All right. Sorry, my phone was muted, so I was talking and talking. Sorry for that. So let's start. Welcome back, all of you. About efficiency and productivity. As I told you, the most important indicator. So this is more about how organizations rationalize their operations. Being efficient is important for many reasons, because actually microfinance institutions do have a high costing ratio, because they are working with tiny loans, and it's the same effort to give a loan of 100 euro or one of 10,000 euro. When you look to the effort at the office and at the bookkeeping services, and by going to your clients, it's the same effort, but so you have to do much more and to be very efficient compared to organizations providing loans in much higher amounts. So for an organization, they have to watch this very, very carefully. Now we will look to especially the first indicator is the most important one. The second one I will skip, because I don't feel that this is an important indicator. And for the productivity of staff and productivity of loan officers, when we start discussing this with managers, we always have a huge fight. So I will skip that too. I will not stay too long with that one, because that is a very difficult one to measure. But at least I will give you the basics of it. But I hope you will, and I will convince you that this is always a discussion. But one that is not discussable, that is the operating expense ratio. So as you can see, it's the second it's the second expense ratio we discussed. The previous one was the provision expense ratio. This is the second one, and we will have a third one later on. So again, keep in mind, if you have a profit and loss figure, the operating expenses is the largest part of the expenses in an organization. Compared to a balance figure, you take the average. So the average is important. And when you are halfway the year, think also in that case annualization. You have to multiply depending on the month when you take the picture. So these are two principles. Don't forget that. So when we talk about operating expenses, it's all expenses related to the operation of the MFI. It's the administrative, it's the fuel, it's the salaries, the staff expenses. These are all available. It's possible. And I will explain, I will show you a figure about this. Sometimes we always talked about the average gross loan portfolio, because this is making most sense, because all your operations are linked to your gross loan portfolio. It's the portfolio that provides you as an organization, it's your most important source of income. So therefore, we have chosen in the microfinance sector the average gross loan portfolio as the denominator. But in the sector, there's always a discussion by the ones who are collecting savings, because they are saying, look, by our percentage-wise, our gross loan portfolio is smaller compared to organizations, credit-only organizations. They can have a much higher part of their assets in gross loan portfolio, while organizations collecting savings, they have to keep part of their assets as cash available for potential withdrawals of savings. So they have to keep higher liquidities available for the withdrawal of savings. So they say our part of the assets, the part of the gross loan portfolio, is most of the times lower compared to other ones. So when we have to divide our denominator by by a smaller average gross loan portfolio, it looks like that we are less efficient, and that's why there is sometimes, to make it more comparable, instead of taking the gross loan portfolio, sometimes you find also the figures dividing it by the average assets. That's the reason why it's sometimes replaced. But you will see, if we take the categories of expenses in a microfinance institution, the most important expenses are the operating ones. The second one are the funding expenses. We will see this later. So this funding for external borrowings, but also for the interest rates that microfinance institutions pay on savings of their clients. And the provision expenses, that's the expenses we discussed already when talking about portfolio quality. And on top of that, you do have also other expenses. But in a microfinance institution, when you have these three, you can say that this is, let's say, 95% of all expenses. So it's not covering all expenses, but nearly 95%. So we focus on these three groups. But in order to compare small cars and large cars, like we have X and Y, we divide it by the average outstanding gross loan portfolio. And by dividing these three expenses by the average outstanding gross loan portfolio, we get the three groups of indicator: the operating expense ratio, the funding expense, and the provision expense ratio. Sometimes, if you want, you can split operating expenses in staff expenses and other administrative expenses, and then you have the staff expense ratio and the admin expense ratio. So you can create your own if you want, but this is not done in the sector. You will see it's always these three categories that are used for this analysis. When looking to this group, what do you think? What is the most easy to reduce the expenses in an organization? When you want to become more efficient?
Sorry,
What group of
Professor.
expenses is the most easy one to reduce?
Provision.
When your portfolio quality is good, it's indeed you keep it at a low level. But I want to say, normally provision expense ratio is around 1%. You know, 2% if your portfolio quality is good. Funding, we will see, depends on the organization. It's around if you have savings, it's a bit lower. We will see it's around 5 to 10. There is not a real benchmark for that one. Operating expenses is around 20, 15, 20, sometimes 30. So it's true you can keep that low, but if you want to improve, it's mainly working on the operating expenses. Doing more with the same people, it's better than giving them lower salaries for doing the same work. So it's by doing with the same expenses a higher amount of activities that you can decrease your operating expense ratio. That's the one this one you can play around most with. This improvement is mostly on that one. Because if you improve much on provision expense, it can go from 2 to 1%. So that's not a big improvement. But if you can bring down operating expenses from 25 to 15%, that makes a huge difference in an organization. But this is the discussion in the sector. The most easy way of being more efficient is just double the size of your loans. You do the same effort, same work, the same operating expenses, but if you have the resources available, you do just more. But this is the trade-off in the sector, of course. You have a specific group of clients, and from the social point of view and the capacity of your clients and the demands of your clients, you have to find a business model that is balancing between the costs and the income. So that's the challenge of this organization. So here we are focusing on the operating expenses. By dividing it, we have the operating expense ratio. It's the best indicator for the overall efficiency of a lending institution because it allows to compare salary and administrative costs and portfolio yield. You know, why do we actually, when I say like 15% is a good, is the average in the sector is considered today as good, huh? I think it's still very high. I think the best organization, we have the most efficient one, is an organization having an operating expense ratio around 9 or 10%. It's an organization in Ethiopia. And the one that is joining us on Saturday is also around that figure. So they are very efficient in the way they work. And it's mostly because they work also not with individual clients, but also by group lending. There's also a way of being very efficient when managing small loans. But I just want, when you have to explain, and I'm just looking to somebody who wants to raise his or her hand. When you have to explain to somebody who wasn't in this class, who doesn't know anything about accounting, and what does it mean in human language, 15% operating expense ratio. Can you explain this to somebody who is brand new in this business? Just give it a try. Raise your hand if you want to give it a try. Just, yeah, do. Please.
Okay. If you want to lend 100, you have to use 15. I don't know how to say it, but
no, this is a very, very good start. It's indeed. If you want to lend 100, for every 100 lent to your clients, you spend 15 in operating expenses. So therefore, this means also that by using this denominator gross loan portfolio, it allows you also to say, so at least that client has to pay 15% on interest rate just to cover your operating expenses. So the lower you can bring down these operating expenses, the better offer you can give to your clients. But that's exactly the way. It's very, very good. So for every 100, you spend 15 on operating expenses. For every 100, if you have a good portfolio quality, you spend 1 or 2 on provision expenses. And if you add all of these, you know exactly actually what your client has to pay in interest rate just to cover your costs. And you want to have a little bit more than your cost because you want, or microfinance organizations also make profit to make it possible for them to grow. So it's very important to also the quality, you know, if the provision expenses are going up, your clients somewhere, somebody has to pay for that one. So it's important to, that's the reason why we take the denominator gross loan portfolio. It makes this comparable to your interest rates, and that's the portfolio yield. So I want you to show me your colors again. Are you all in the group? So my question is, what do you think? The operating expense ratio of an MFI improves when the portfolio increases. When all the rest is the same, but when your portfolio increases, the operating tends to be better, and better is lower. I just show your answers. I see green and I see doubts. Is it Yannick, am I right, who's doubting?
Yes, sir.
And why are you doubting, Yannick? And there's also yeah, somebody else, yes, with also doubt. Tell me, what are the doubts about? So when the portfolio grows, the operating expense will improve when all the rest remains the same. So the answer is like most were showing, it's true. But what was your doubt about? Can you explain? Why weren't you sure about it?
Sometime also we have to look at the quality of the loans.
Yes,
That's
yes.
that all loans are good for the MFIs.
Absolutely, Yannick. But therefore, I just want to interrupt you because here with this kind of questions, don't think too much. If it grows, I know when it grows too fast and the quality is not good, of course, it's there are other. But therefore, I told you in the beginning, just look to that one change. All the rest remains the same. Your quality remains the same. It's just it grows. You work with the same people, then it improves. It just is even mathematics. So don't think too much with this yes/no questions. Don't take into account any other influences. Okay? Otherwise, every answer is doubtful. The next question. This is something that is not correct. Sorry for that. But I will, yeah, we will discuss it. When the average loan size decreases, what do you think in general? What will happen? Will it improve when the loan sizes decreases? Yeah, I see the red colors very clearly now showing indeed. Smaller loans do require higher cost. Now, the answer is not linked to that one, but the answer is correct. So it's not in my... What do you think? Organizations in urban areas, do they tend to have a better operating expense ratio compared to organizations operating in the rural areas? I see all the greens now, and that's indeed correct. And so the more distances, the lower density of population is making it more difficult for microfinance institutions. It's higher costs involved. So that is certainly true. And this one, that answer was already, it was the wrong way around for the answers. But when an organization starts mobilizing savings, the operating expense ratio is normally higher. And the reason why is what we discussed already. If they have staff involved for that one, for the other operations, they have higher liquidity ratios, liquidity on the asset side. So they have people doing other work for the mobilizing of the savings. There are costs involved, but by dividing only by the average gross loan portfolio, these organizations do have higher costs on the operating side. On the other side, they will have lower funding costs because in general, in general, the savings are cheaper from a funding point of view compared to external borrowings or commercial borrowings on the microfinance market. So for saving, mobilizing organizations, it's actually a balance between these two. Okay, but the answer was given already. So here, if we take to our organization X, you see this blue part, that's the operating expense ratio. From 44, 37, 27, 22. So in 4 years, they had a tremendous improvement on operating expenses. What do you think? Is this, yeah, I told it before, I think, but is this a young or an old organization? When you think it's a young one, you can show green. If you think it's an old one, you can show red. Yeah, I see that green, green, green. But Yannick, he shows another color. Yannick, it's a young, quite young organization in general, because this is what you see. Young organizations can improve very quick on operating expenses. It's quite logical. When they have a small portfolio in the beginning, you need, when you start, I just say it simple. If you need one bookkeeper, even if you have only 200 clients, but the same bookkeeper is still around when you have 2,000 clients. So you can, in the beginning, you have to invest in some back office stuff, even if you have small operations, and so therefore the costs are there. So when you are growing your operations, you can become more efficient. So this is what we see as a trend in a younger organization, finding it's still the real balance. Here we go. When we look to the figure of MFI Y, it's the large company, it's the more established one. So you can see that they do have found the real balance of their operations. When you remember, when we go to their portfolio, it doesn't mean that they don't grow their portfolio. It's just, if we just see the figure of that organization, here it is. You can see this organization is still fast growing. So they doubled in 2 years, another increase. So it's really a fast growing organization. But they have found the pace, they have found the rhythm to grow at the same way with their operating expenses. They are not able anymore with the new way of working to decrease, to improve on operating expenses the way they work. They are actually they are able to do these operations with a 15%. Apparently not possible for them to become more efficient. I'm just looking back to that graph where here is the one. So here you can see they have found, with their business model, it seems that this is the way they do. It's most of the times the sign of an established more, but we will see later on what level they want to improve. But that's for another indicator. If they cannot improve in this one, yeah, what you see in many organizations when they improve, this is when we start by, how do you say, the informatization processes, and when digitalization, when they have more processes in place, digitalization, then you see organizations really making a difference in operating expenses. Not in the beginning, because it requires also a certain investment and you need specific staff for that one. But when you have enough volume at a certain level, this digitalization is really helping organizations to improve on the operating expense ratio. I saw hands from Sylvia, or not anymore? It's not anymore.
Well, I was thinking that that there is a big gap, like 16% net profit, but then I thought that yes, you have some other expenses, maybe.
Yeah.
Because I thought that it might be unethical to have 16% net profit for a microfinancing.
No, it's true. So on top of that, indeed, you have the funding expense and the provision expense. We will see when you put them together, the net result is indeed much lower. Yeah, but you are right. 16% is indeed a high profit, but some do. And then you can question yourself, is this the right social organization or not? But in general, we see that the main reason why organizations lower the interest rate, because this is the income, when they lower it, it's most of the times because of competition rather than because we can do. The most motivating part is competition. Yeah, and
Peter, I have a question regarding the portfolio yield. Here, what does it represent? Is it the yield of each different loan provided to clients, or
yeah, Karin, I can tell you this is all income related to your gross loan portfolio, but it's an indicator we haven't discussed yet. So this will come later. And so now we are only focusing here on the blue part, on the operating expense, but the portfolio yield will be in another group of indicators discussed.
okay, thank you.
So just to say that operating expense went down over the last years, but there are not many new figures available. It's still around 14%. It seems that it is going down a little bit, but not that much. We do see that all MFIs are indeed around this 15%, Africa a little bit higher. And the main reason for this one is that most of the organizations of Africa in the sample are cooperatives that are mobilizing savings. And you know that organizations mobilizing savings, they are a little bit, they are not defavorized when it comes to the operating expense. So it looks like that they are less effective less efficient compared to others, but it has also to do by this specific situation. And also density of population compared to Asia, for example. So cost per borrower, the information is in the slides and I'm going to skip it because it's not an indicator that I've never used that one in my analysis, so it doesn't make sense, I think, to focus too much on that one, but it's considered by others as an important one. But okay, I will skip. If we have really a lot of time available, we can discuss this, and we can discuss this later. So keep it in mind if you really want, but it's not an interesting one. This is more interesting by looking at productivity of staff and productivity of loan officers. Now, it's also a very simple indicator. You just look to the number of active borrowers and you divide this by the number of staff. Or you divide it by the number of loan officers. So these are the two indicators. But I told you this is when we have this session with the managers of MFIs, it's always a huge discussion, and it starts by the following. What's an active borrower? What's the difference between a borrower and an active borrower? Is this, and what do we do when we have groups? Do we calculate the individual members, or do we take in the group, or do we consider the group as one active borrower? And what do we do when we have a borrower that is in arrears for, let's say, more than a year and it's written off? Is this still a borrower or not? And you can imagine that kind of discussions. And staff members, do we have to include all staff members? Do we have to take also the driver and the gardener including, or is it only the people involved with the operating expense, and so on and so on? And this is a very difficult indicator. It's a simple indicator on its own, but my answer is, look, it's extremely important that you as manager know what's in the indicator and that you stick to your own definition, that you don't change from one day to the other by definition. It's a very difficult one to compare with other organizations because everybody has that kind of specific situations. What do you do, for example, when you have external consultants? Are they part of your staff? If they are paid by a third party, or are they not part of your staff? You know, we also talk about loan officers, but you can also talk about front office people. When you have people handling the cash, the teller, is it only the loan officer by title or others? You can see on that one, you can have this huge discussion, and I don't want to turn into that discussion. But I just want to make it clear, once you have a definition, stick to it. It's this fact sheet, these indicators are, first of all, for your own MFI. This, indeed, the sector is asking for reports, the investors are asking for reports, but first of all, just make this fact sheet, this analysis for your own organization. When it makes sense to include the gardener and the driver in your staff, just do it, but keep to it. And I will show you the figure we had about the Rwanda organization. You remember the Rwanda organization? You see what is happening here. They did have clients, and suddenly only 1,000 clients, and then 2,000. So when you have that kind of information, it's what is happening in this organization. Did they lost, let's say, 80% of their clients in 1 year? No, they just changed the definition. Here, they were just calculating the individual members in a group, and here they only took the number of groups. But you see, when you change that kind of definition, it's quite difficult for you to make analysis of your organization. And like the average loan suddenly seems to be multiplied by 2, 3, 4 times, but it's just because they were calculating the group loans, and here they were just still calculating on the individual basis. And they were still looking to the individual members within the group. Here they changed to the loans given to a group. So you can see that kind of, when you have this kind of a report, it's very hard to make a good analysis. So just stick to the figures and then it makes sense. But if it's a real but when there is a real question to me in the by the managers what to do with groups, in general, my answer is always, if you give a loan to a group, it's just one contract and you have only one contact person. You don't know what is happening with the members of the group because it's self-managed by the groups, then you just consider this as one loan. But if you give a group loan, but your loan officers are visiting the individual members for follow-up, then it's more logical, of course, because it's much more work, that you include all the members as that you calculate them, all the individuals as active borrowers. But that's, I think, according to me, a quite logical one, and that's the most important. What I would like to show here is by having both, I will just go to the loan officers. It's actually the same number of borrowers by loan officers. I don't have to give much more explanation. Here, loan officers, most of the time, I use front office people that are in contact with your client. Just take these because these are the productive people. Back office people are not productive people. A bookkeeper is not productive. He's working or she is working hard, but the real productive people are the ones in front, working with your clients. Try to have as many people as possible to your clients. Keep your back office for as small as possible. This is important also for your operating expenses. And the difference between both is interesting to see. And this is what you can see in our graph. I will show it, but before we go to the graph, so here I will not ask you the colors because the questions are too easy, I think. The higher the ratio, the better the productivity. That's indeed true. It tends to be higher in rural areas. No, productivity is lower because of the distances. People are in general less productive in rural areas because they have to, it takes more time for the visits, for the collection of the loans, for the visits of the groups. And then when you have a high rotation rate of credit agents, if you have a lot of new people who have to be trained, it's quite logical, I think, that these people are not that productive yet. And so it takes time for loan officers to get familiar with all the procedures. So when you have a high rotation rate or low retention rate, that's the same. It's the productivity it will go down. But this is the graph that I wanted to show. By having both figures next to each other, the difference between dividing, this is the whole number of active borrowers by your loan officers, by your front office people, and this is divided by all people. The difference between both shows you the size of your back office. You see? So here it's a larger back office compared to here. Here they did have a lot of people, nearly, imagine that they are the same size, then it means that everybody is in the front operation. The more people you have in the back office, the bigger the gap here. So here you can see this MFI X was having a quite large, quite important back office, but then the back office went smaller and the productivity was also smaller. Remember, that was the year that they have, after the year of the high write-off, they changed apparently the activities, the productivity, the way of working. The staff, they had to write, apparently the loan officers, the burden on them, the workload was too high, 321. And that was the year with the high write-off, with the high portfolio at risk. So apparently they changed the policy, and you can see the workload of loan officers became smaller, but they put also more people in front. So they didn't increase the number of staff, but they have put more people in front office operations. A little bit changed, but here you can see a huge difference. And then the years after, you can see that the step by step it increased a little bit. In general, if you need a rule of thumb, 250 clients per loan officer is considered as the average in the sector, as a quite normal average. I remember I did this training once in Rwanda, and we were comparing the figures of productivity of staff. And there was one organization in Rwanda having 7,000 active borrowers per loan officer. So that guy, he was really extremely proud because nobody, the highest of the others was around 250, 300, 400, and he did have 7,000 borrowers per loan officer. But actually, the reason why, because his microfinance institution, according to me, was not really a microfinance institution, because they were giving advances on salary for the army. So it was actually an institution providing advances on salaries on army staff. So actually there was, you didn't need to have somebody looking to the loans. It was not a real loan, it was just advances on the wages. And it was, in that case, of course, you need only one staff member to handle 7,000 clients. That was not a real microfinance institution. So behind these figures, you have to be careful also sometimes. 250 is considered as quite normal, as you can see also for this well-established organization. Today, with the new technology, we do see that these numbers are increasing. But you can see this organization, why the more established one is a quite, how can I say, a quite stable organization. And they have a very small back office at the end. It's only, yeah, if compared to all staff, it's a very small back office. So that organization, you remember, 15% operating expenses, it's quite difficult for them to bring it, to lower it, because that's the maximum of efficiency that they have reached. I went a little bit quick through these indicators because I feel, according to me, that this is not difficult ones. I hope it's not too fast. I would say raise your hand if you have a specific question on this one. Nobody's raising hands, so then we can go to the next group of indicators. And this is about the financial management. I'm just looking to, yeah, we go to the financial management. So that's the third group of indicators. This is a purely back office activity. Here, your management has to play its role. It's all to do with to make sure that there is a sufficient liquidity level to manage all obligations, loan insurances and debt reimbursements, ensure also the correspondence between the asset and liability accounts, take into account the maturity, the changes, the rates, especially when you are working with foreign currency exchange and everything. So this is important. And actually, I would say that collecting savings, when you collect savings, financial management is even more important. Liquidity is not easy to manage. Our own organization went bankrupt. Our bank that founded our foundation went bankrupt in the 30s, 1930s, so quite long time ago, because of extremely bad financial management. They didn't manage the liquidities. They had a lot of savings from farmers. They had a lot of investments in the sector of farming here in Belgium, doing very well, but they did have too much savings, too much liquidity. And the requests for loans was lower than the capacity they had. So they had a huge liquidity. And that became a problem, because what did they do with this extreme high liquidity levels? They started to invest in sectors that our bank was not familiar with, and they started with high investments in the sector on the stock exchange. They went to the New York, to Wall Street, and they invested in industrial shares that they didn't know about, with a high return at that time. But then you had the Wall Street crash in the 30s. So there was not a correspondence between the asset and the liability accounts anymore. Farmers became anxious and they said, we want to have our savings back, but they couldn't sell the value. They couldn't sell the shares at the value that was of the original value. There was a crash on the sector and the organization went bankrupt. So we are certainly convinced that this financial management is certainly important. It happened also here. And there was at that time here in Belgium no regulation on minimum liquidity, so it was completely free. Since then, there were new regulations, so we thought this cannot happen anymore, until we arrived in 2008, and then something similar nearly happened again. But here there are two indicators that are sometimes confusing people. And that's the difference between the funding expense ratio and the cost of funds ratio. The funding expense ratio is our third indicator on expenses. So we had operating, we had we have the funding expense and the provision expense. These are the three expenses. So this is the third and the last one. How much does the funding cost? How much do I pay on average on my funding resources is the cost of funds. A very easy indicator is what is my leverage? How much can I leverage with my equity in depth? And then an easy one, how much of my assets is going to the real activities to my portfolio? But I will focus mainly on the first two because on that one, try to keep attention to that one because it's a confusing one sometimes. All right. So here again, we have all the interests, and here is your question, Karin. Sorry, no, it's later on. Sorry, it's all the interest and fee expenses on my liabilities, on my funding liabilities. So everything I pay on interest, fees, and commissions, on deposits or on borrowings, funding loans, borrowings is a better word. So linked to my funding debts, and because it's a figure from the profit and loss divided by a balance figure. So I have to take average, and I have to keep in mind, if I am not at the end of the year, annualization. You know the mantra, that keep this in mind. So here we have the three groups, funding divided by, we are talking about this one now. So now I've discussed the three of them. So here we take into account all interest and all fees of the MFI that they're paying on debts and deposits. So when we take now all of these three costs, you remember when the funding expense is 5%, your colleague told us in the beginning, on one, if you have 100 of a loan, you have to pay 5 on funding expenses when it is 5%. By adding these three together, this is what actually your clients have to pay at least on interest fees just to cover your three groups of main expenses. But it has to be, of course, a little bit more because you have also other expenses a little bit more, and also you want to make some profit. Okay. So I want to show you colors again. This ratio tends to increase as the MFI becomes less dependent on donations. When you become mature, I see green in all kinds of, but also a lot of people who haven't put on the video anymore. So can you please switch on again? But the ones that are on the screen, they all show green except Karin, I think. Karin is doubting. You think that it's if you become less dependent on donations, that this indicator will decrease. Now, the ones with the green ones, they were right. And it's like this. So normally most indicators improve when you become more mature. You become more efficient. You have, if you are good in your work, your portfolio quality is good, so your provision expenses will remain low. But this one, when this one goes up, it's not a bad sign of management. When you have starting MFI, sometimes they can rely on donations for starting up, but once they need to have access to more commercial funding, this indicator goes up, the funding expense. It's quite normal that in the beginning the funding expense is lower, but when you have to rely for your growth on the commercial funding, then it becomes higher. Second question. Is it when you collect savings, this ratio is used to be higher? In general, what do you think? When you collect savings, the funding expense will go higher. Now I see different colors. I see a lot of green, I see a lot of red. And the more I see, the more red, now green again. And that, it's also quite difficult for me when you have people with a red shirt and a green back. So I don't know what the color is they want to show. But indeed, it's actually the people with red are right. Because when you mobilize savings in general, the interest rates paid on savings are normally lower compared to organizations who have only external borrowings. So this is what we said, microfinance institutions mobilizing savings, they have a higher operating expense ratio, but they have a lower funding expense ratio because of the lower interest rates compared to commercial funding in the microfinance market. It depends much on the fact that MFIs get funding mainly either through debt. When you have debt, the ratio will be higher, or through capital. The ratio will be lower. Is this correct? Because you have two sources of funding, of course. You can have shares or you can have debt, being external borrowings. So debt financing, your ratio will be higher. Capital financing ratio will be lower. Is this correct? I see green, green, green. You can see it. Check yourself what your other colleagues are saying. And I see a little bit red. I see a red shirt here in front. Oh no, but it's a green. It's indeed here. You see, normally when you finance yourself through capital, it might be possible, of course, capital is also a cost involved. When you have shareholders, you pay also dividend, but dividends are not included in this indicator. Dividends are not considered as a funding expense. Right? Dividends is actually something you pay out of your net profit to your shareholders, or you don't pay, or you might have capital that you don't pay any dividends on. It's possible, like many microfinance institutions, like we have the organization on Saturday, the main shareholder is a foundation, so there is no cost involved for that funding. So funding expenses are only related to debt financing, not to capital. So those only on debt have a much higher ratio than the ones that are highly capitalized organizations. Okay. So I will just show you the figure of our two organizations, X and Y. You remember, X was a young organization in the very beginning. They did have a very low funding expense ratio, but it went up the years after, while the organization, the established one, that was increasing year after year from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. So what do you think that this organization will do? They cannot bring down the operating expense because their business model was, like say, as efficient as possible. The portfolio quality was good, so the provision expenses, they could not bring that down, but they did have increasing funding expenses. What do you think that this organization is looking for? Was looking for? Somebody? If you are a manager, what will you do? Indeed. They turned to savings. First of all, of course, they tried on the market to find cheaper funding, and that was, of course, one of the first steps. But because of yeah, the market didn't provide cheaper loans. So that organization indeed turned to savings and they started a new business model. And indeed, that was their decision. So this is the funding expense ratio. And here, don't confuse with the cost of funds, because the cost of funds is what they actually pay for the debt, for the funding. So indeed, it's the same nominator, but now we have a denominator on the average funding liabilities. So not the average gross loan portfolio, but now we take the funding liabilities. And this provides you a kind of average interest on all liabilities. That's what this indicator says. So it's including all financial resources, deposits, commercial funding, subsidized funding, and actually also quasi-capital. There are some, I don't know the word in English. How do you call that? Another word for quasi-capital. Is somebody here speaking Dutch? Somebody? Achtergestelde lening, that's the word in Dutch, and I'm looking. Jannek, yes, of course, you know. Achtergestelde lening, how do you say this in English? Yeah, sorry for that. I have to find the word. It's like, yeah, I don't know the word in English for the moment. Sorry for that. I will look for it. But quasi capital, this is that kind of loans that are considered as quasi capital. So if you put both next to each other, the nominator is the same. It's only a difference in the denominator, average gross loan portfolio or average financial resources. A small exercise. Here you see a microfinance institution. You can see a very simple balance sheet, 100 cash, 1,000 portfolio, 200 fixed assets, 1,300. What have they done on the liability? How do they fund themselves? By borrowings, mainly equity and some others. So there are no dividends. The interest and the fee expenses on the profit and loss side, it's 40, and the average gross loan portfolio here, as you can see, is 1,000. We don't have fluctuations. So my question, calculate the cost of funds and the funding expense ratio. And if you know the answer, you can put it in the chat. So the funding is done by borrowings, 400, and equity 600. So, but the main funding resources, so the funding is coming in. What is the cost of funds? It's not 5.7. That's not the right one. Nobody? Cost of funds? No. Shall I go back to the definition? Cost of funds, yeah. We have a winner. Richard, can you raise your hand? I know who's Richard, but I don't see Richard.
Yeah, hello.
Where are you?
I don't know. I cannot see the room.
But can you raise your hand?
Yeah, I'm raising it.
Ah, I don't see it. Sorry, here, now it's better.
Ah, you mean like this? Okay.
Ah,
Sorry.
okay. No, okay, Richard. Now I will go, if you go back to the definition. So you take the average gross loan portfolio, that's 1,000, or the average financial resources where you pay your interest and fees on. So here, indeed, cost of funds ratio is you have your borrowings 400 because that's the liabilities that you pay for what you are paying. You are paying fee and interests 40% on 400 borrowings, so that's 10%. And your funding expense is indeed the same nominator, but now compared to your portfolio, so it's 4%. So you don't include your equity in this case. It's just on the borrowings, external borrowings that can also include your savings, for example, as borrowings and savings. Perhaps I had to put it here. If somebody thought that other liabilities is savings, in that case, you have to divide 40 by 700. But it's not the case. They are funding it only by borrowings, just to make sure that you don't have that if you make that mistake. Did somebody calculate it 40 divided by 700? In that case, it was a little bit lower, the cost of funds ratio.
So
5.7.
what can be the other liabilities than these payables?
Yeah, accounts payable, for example, receivable accounts payable that organizations still have to pay, for example. Yeah. So you have, for example, yeah, that's one of the main liabilities. And invoices that others have to pay to you. Excuse me, it's on the liability side. Huh? So you have issued an invoices, but it's not paid yet. So that's still a liability. Is that what you are thinking about, to consider this as a liability for like savings, for example? Yeah. But perhaps next one I have to put next to it that this is not a funding resource. Otherwise, it might be confusing. Okay. Now, just do the same for the other organization. Actually, it's quite straightforward. So, oh, sorry, I see a question. So about what is other liabilities, that's okay. And then what's the difference between average funding and borrowings? No, that's the funding is actually including borrowings. Your funding resources can be borrowings, and borrowings is the word we use when you have, as an organization, when you are borrowing money on the microfinance market, and we make the difference. And another funding resource can be deposits, can be your savings. So that's funding resources. And a third funding resource can be equity. That's also a funding resource. But this is what we say borrowings. You can see it in the fact sheet. Perhaps I can show it. Fact sheet, where it is here. Balance sheet, these are the right names. So here we talk about demand deposits, time deposits, and then we have the borrowed funds, and borrowed funds is external. Time deposits, long-term borrowed funds, and then you have these quasi-capital accounts. Okay. So here the cost of funds ratio is the same. 40 divided by 400. But the funding expense ratio is extremely high, 20%. It's 40 divided by 200. Now, normally the cost of funds is always higher than your funding expense ratio. But here is what you see, they have borrowings, but they don't put it in portfolio. And they have borrowings, but they have less portfolio compared to their borrowings. So that's a very awkward situation. If you look to the size of the portfolio compared to the total assets, they have a very tiny portfolio size. So this organization is actually not putting all the money. When you see this difference, you know already immediately this organization is not putting the main asset is not the gross loan portfolio. So this is a situation that you normally don't see in a normal microfinance institution. Is that clear? So don't confuse both. I just want to show you in the fact sheet, because when we have an exercise, you can always see both indicators, then you know where to find it. Let's take this one. Yeah. So just to give you some orientation in the fact sheet, so the balance sheet, profit and loss, some extra information, especially on the quality of portfolio, but also the number of branches, the number of staff, male, female borrowers. So this is all extra information. But then you have the performance indicators, and we have nearly 80 and more than 80 financial indicators, and then we have another group of social indicators. So many figures are calculated automatically, but we have put them in the same groups of indicators as we are discussing here. And when we go to the and here you can find these three indicators. We make a difference in the fact sheet. We make a difference between the cost of borrowed funds and the cost of client deposits. So in the fact sheet, we don't put them together. When the first indicator we discussed was like putting deposits and borrowed funds together and taking all the interest fees that you pay on these liabilities. But here we make a difference between client deposits and borrowed funds. And when you take the same figures, but dividing them all together by the by the average gross loan portfolio, you have your funding expense ratio. So here you find the information in the fact sheet. All these indicators are calculated. Even if it's only about 15 indicators that are used for the figures. All right, let's finish this evening by these two indicators that are the easy ones. That's the debt to equity. And then it's a very easy one. You take all liabilities divided by equity. And this is how much consider the leverage effect you can have with your equity. How much debt can you mobilize? How much liabilities can you mobilize? In the microfinance sector, you will see that they are very conservative. This is not very high. In the commercial banking sector, at a certain moment, they went too high. They had a lot of liabilities. 1 to 25 to 30% was not, 1 to 20, 1 to 30 was not exceptional in the banking sector. But in microfinance, on average, it's only 1 to 3. 1 to 3, 1 to 2. It's not. It's in general, they normally do have a good. How you can say the equity? You can consider this as the. Is that the right English word? A good cushion. And they keep this mattress, if I can say like that, quite thick compared to the commercial banking sector. So this is what I said, it's how much the financial leverage of an organization. And we, in general, when we do manage at BRS also an investment fund. We have our own investments in microfinance. And here's what we are saying. It's of a particular interest to lenders. This is one of the indicators we are looking at. How big is this safety cushion of this organization? Because this gives information to what extent this institution can absorb losses after all liabilities are paid. And I must say, when it's 1 to 3, 1 to 4 is the average in the sector. I say, from an investor point of view, when it's more than 1 to 7, then we become quite, yeah, then we feel that that's the edge. 1 to 7, it's considered in microfinance as the edge. I will give you the example of. We will see if the example of MFI X and Y. I do have them, I think, here in next to each other. Perhaps a little bit small, but I increase it a little bit. Like here. Sorry, go down. Here you can see the figures are not. So this is equity and this is borrowings. They don't have savings. Savings is 0, 0, 0. But you can see this organization X did have 1 to, the safety cushion was quite thin. It's 1 to 5, 1 to 5. But here they increased they increased the equity very much, and now it's 1 to 2. So this is the organization situation. If we go to the X, to the other one, you know, they are really to the edge. So it's 14%. The cushion is very thin in this organization. Why? It's for that. It has become for them quite difficult to go further than this 84% of external borrowing. So here you can see how thick the cushion is in your organization. 1 to 7, keep this in mind, is considered as the edge. In general, they have low debt to equity ratios. That's what we explained already. As here you can see the figures, 1 to 3, 1 to 5, quite conservative. So therefore it was always considered as a good organizations to do investments if everything goes well with the portfolio quality. And then the last one before we close, that's the portfolio to assets. How much of your assets is put into portfolio? We show you the figure. In general, they just take the portfolio, divide by assets. It's a very straightforward, very simple indicator. Doesn't requires much explanation. And I told you 80% is considered as an average. Credit-only organizations sometimes tend to go to 80 to 90% even. And here you see, so the scale doesn't start at 0. So it's not like Africa having only half of all MFIs, but they are at 70%. It's mainly because of savings. They require higher liquidity levels, so therefore they have a lower gross loan portfolio to assets. But 80%, just take this as the benchmark to keep in mind as a normal organization. So these are all the indicators. And now, before we close, we go to heaven. And I know it's an exaggerated figure, extremely exaggerated. So don't blame me. But it gives you the idea how you can become rich. So if you want to see this one, and it's too obvious. But if you have a portfolio to assets that is increasing, and you have a good quality, and everything remains stable, then you have a higher result. And if you have a higher result, you can see what do you do with this money. Will you increase the interest rates on your savings? Will you use it to grow, to put in your equity and to grow the portfolio? Or do you use the money to give dividends? When you have the money, you can choose. And when you have all these choices, you become more attractive than others. And when you are attractive, you have more clients. And when you have more clients and you are a saving, mobilizing organization, the level of your savings might increase. And then you have more money available to increase your gross loan portfolio, and so on and so on. And at the end, you become a very large, proficient, very profitable organization. I know it's a bit exaggerated, but the moment that everything started, and that I think you can close by this, and it started yesterday, when your portfolio quality remains good. That's the secret for every microfinance institution. Then your organization, if you focus on that one, all the rest is following quite automatically. It's not really automatic, but you understand what I want to say. So here I would like to end, and I wish you a very good night rest or evening, and we see each other back on Saturday morning. Normally in class we have breakfast, but this time, unfortunately, it's not possible. So I cannot promise a breakfast for Saturday. Just bring your own breakfast to the classroom. Here I wish you all the best and see you on Saturday. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.